Hi everyone, Armoured Pants here, and I have another video for you in the British line. This is the Tier 10 Conqueror heavy tank. Now, this tank is a tank that a lot of players struggle with. I think a lot of players struggle with the British heavy line in general. Some, of course, love it. Now, it has taken me a while to get to this video. I do apologise for that. But as always, we will look at the tech spec, then we look at the gameplay, and we will have a recap, and hopefully you will understand and be able to play the Conqueror a bit better afterwards. For the tech spec, we will of course use blitzhanger.com, which is a great website for all blitzers, and if you're not using it, you should be. Now, we're going to have a look at the tech spec now, and then we'll talk about gameplay and tactics thereafter. Now, there's a new provision possible on the British heavies. It's sandbag armor. It can be both standard and enhanced, and this adds hit points to the total pool of hit points you have. So there's a temptation, because it's a heavy tank, to do that, but I would recommend not doing that. And the reason is that if you use the other equipment that allows you to pen more or to reload faster, then or protects your crew, provisions rather than equipment, then that means that one extra pen is 400 plus damage points, one extra bounce is 500 plus damage points, depends on what's firing at you in tier 9 or tier 10, right? So therefore I would use those instead. I'd run black tea, etc., rather than use the sandbag armor. Just my own opinion though. Now, the three gun types, tiers 8 to 10. Tier 10 gun has 259 pen and improves actual DPM, because on the tier 9 gun, which says it has the actual best DPM, that's not actually going to pen as often, so therefore your theoretical DPM is high, but your actual DPM is going to be lower, especially if you're up tiered. So therefore, use the tier 10 gun. There's also something very special about the tier 10 gun as well, which we're going to discuss in a second. Now, Pramo is APCR. You get 326 millimeters of pen with that, and 340 damage points compared to 400 plus with AP. That's if you use gun rammer rather than rather than calibrated shells. I usually use gun rammer. Here's the special thing: with a tier 10 gun, you get Hesh. Yes, baby, Hesh. We all love a bit of Hesh. And it gives you 120 millimeters of pen, and it's going to run 515 plus damage points. You've also got the options going to set the opposition tank on fire, blow modules, do all sorts of damage. So Hesh baby Hesh, yesh baby yesh. And this is really what you want, and it's available on this tank with a tier 10 gun, and that's another reason to get it, right? Now, muzzle velocity with top gun is 1067 meters per second, goes up to 1387 meters per second. Supercharge, if in a heavy tank, I would always use supercharge. That's just my own personal preference, but we know there's a direct correlation between muzzle velocity and penetration. APCR muzzle velocity is higher. It's 1734 meters per second, up from 1334 meters per second with supercharge. So if you want to make a distant shot on a fast moving target, switch up to APCR, because the round travels much faster. Now, reload with gun rammer is 8.84 seconds, which for a tier 9 heavy is very good. And it's 9.51 if you use calibrated shells, if that's your preferred play style. I myself use a gun rammer. I like to fire and have the option to fire as often as possible. Gun depression is only 7 degrees. You might have thought it would be more, given that it's a British tank with a strong turret. And it's 15 degrees of elevation, so it has adequate gun alignment, but it's not great. Its speed is 34.3 kilometers per hour and 12 in reverse, so it doesn't seem that fast. But as we've discussed before, that is the wrong parameter to look at. What you actually want to consider is its power to weight ratio, and its power to weight ratio and its traverse is excellent. It's one of the best in the tiers for a tier 9 heavy. So that means it's an excellent brawler. It also means, even though it doesn't have a huge top speed, it gets there quickly, accelerates quickly. It's good over rough terrain, up hills, etc. So therefore it's very mobile and agile. Now let's have a look at the armor. The armor is, for a tier 9 heavy, disappointing, right? You could argue that this is basically a heavy armored medium tank in terms of its armor profile, rather than a heavy tank. You can get good relative armor numbers, as we see here. If we look at the numbers on the top left, are going to red. You have a large gun mounted in the center of the turret. You can side scrape off the side of the turret and the side of the tank, and it's very effective at that if you are top tier. When you're up tier though, this tank does struggle, and in many ways this tank is kind of like Schrodinger's tank. It can be really fantastic, but it can also be awful at the same time. And I think that's why people struggle. It's both simultaneously great and awful. And I think a lot of that depends on whether or not you're top tier or not. Top tier, this tank excels. If you're up tiered, it can struggle a bit. Here's the other thing about the tank. It's not particularly brilliant at anything. And therefore, it makes it difficult for players to choose exactly what tactics to go with. So, hull down, okay, fine, because it does have a relatively strong turret, but it doesn't have the gun depression to really make that a killer tactic. Side scraping, again, it can do it, especially against lower tier tanks, but once you're up tiered or even against other tier 9 heavies, it tends to get penned because it has fairly light armor on the sides that we see here. It has those piece of spaced armor on the side, and here's one key thing about that. If you're facing a big HE or a Hesh monster in tier 9 or 10, turn your tank to the side. Your instinct is to turn your tank to the front so that your most heavily armored part of your tank is facing them. Turn your tank to the side because the spaced armor will absorb nearly all or most of the damage of the Hesh or HE. So just something to bear in mind if you find yourself facing up to a Death Star or a Yagaru and he's going to HE or Hesh you, just turn to the side. Now in terms of tactics, this tank, because it's not brilliant at any one thing, just adequate at most things, it's difficult for players, particularly inexperienced players, to know what to do. However, it has good gun handling, right? It is very agile and mobile because of that power to weight ratio. So therefore, I would suggest you play it as follows. If you are top tier, you can be aggressive, go front on. The armor is adequate enough to get bounces off tier 8 tanks, even big gun tier 8s like the IS series, etc. It's also a very good brawler, so you can take on mediums, etc. And you'll see that in the gameplay we're going to look at here. If you are up tiered, this tank becomes more difficult to play. It's exactly the same tank, but it's Schrodinger's tank. It just all of a sudden becomes awful. So while we're going to have a look at the gameplay here in New Bay, we are top tiered, so we're lucky. If you are bottom tier, what I suggest you do is you use the mobility of the tank to either follow your mediums and add support to them, because up against tier 10 mediums you can bounce some shots, etc. Or follow your own heavies, but stay behind them and try to use their armor, and then use your good rate of fire to support them. At least until you become comfortable with the tank, I would recommend doing these things, because there isn't really any other clear tactics. There's nothing that stands out as amazing about this tank. It's not like, for example, if you're playing a T-34 in the American tier 8 heavy, where hull down all the time, right? Because it has that gun depression, it has that strong turret. Here you have a relatively strong turret with those angles on the armor, but you don't have the gun depression to make that tactic really effective. But you can see here I'm top tier, so I'm going to be a bit aggressive. I have 7 degrees of gun depression, so it's okay. It's okay for these small hills or hillocks here. So I'm going to see if I can push on and do some damage. I've used my mobility. As I said, it doesn't have such a high top speed, but it is mobile because of that power to weight ratio. We've pushed on, we've captured C, and now we're pushing on to capture B. We get lucky in this game because we've isolated this waffle tractor. And of course the gun and the reload on that makes it a very dangerous competitor. But of course, as we all know, this series of German TDs has no armor. And if they get isolated like this, and there's 3 tanks coming onto them, 2 tier 9s, it's going to be very, very difficult for him to get out of this situation. And we see here he's just taken out. Why he was there on his own and why he got isolated, I don't know. He has the speed. He should have gone and followed the rest of his team and supported him with that big gun. Now we are, despite taking out the waffle tractor, now a tank down, and we have 2 bases now. Because their fast movers have gone and taken A, I believe that they're going to be coming to flank us and to take C. So I'm going into position here to see if I can stop that, to counter that, and to protect this base, but also buy my team some time. Now you see what I mean about the armor profile. This is the first engagement you're seeing with this tank in the game. Nice bounce off, I think it was the turret, and then I can put a round into the IS-3, and you know, it is effective against lower tier tanks, and the reload allows you to be a very good brawler. And there's going to be a monster brawl coming up here. I'm going to be involved in a brawl, and you can see now the Panther 2 is just coming in. He's hit me in the side. The side is very vulnerable to AP, but I'm already reloaded, and I'm going to try to take out this IS before I get fully engaged with the Panther 2. This ends up as a 3v1 brawl because the Panther 2 is here, but also the RU-251 is coming in as well. So I'm going, as I come to engage this Panther 2, in a couple of seconds you're going to see me getting hit from behind by the RU-251 as well. So it's not really actually a 3v1, it's probably a bad description. It's a 2v1 that goes to a 1v1, which goes back to a 2v1. And here's the RU-251 coming up my bum, and he's giving me a nice Freddie Mercury round there, right up the ass. But the thing to do is here, I'm going to stay calm, and I don't even need a round to take him out. I'm just going to ram straight into him, ram him again, and take him out. RU-251 is one of the, let's say, least armoured tanks in Tier 8, so it's very easy to take him out. Now, you know, I think this brawl here is exactly typical of what I was talking about with this tank. Really, really effective when you're the top tier. But if I'd been against 2 tier 9 mediums, or rather, I know it's a medium and a light tank, or even 2 tier 10s, there's no way I would have survived, and there's no way I would have come out as well, because I wouldn't have had the armor, I wouldn't have had the or a rate of fire to take these guys out. The Panther 2, I think he's probably a bit panicked there. He fluffed a couple of shots, but also as you're pushing onto him, because the Panther 2 is a tier 8 medium and it doesn't have such a big gun, he's difficult for him to pen, he's looking for spots, and I think then he just couldn't find an area to pen, and he fluffed his shot. And then I just used the armor to take out the RU-251. Now we're back to a 4v2 situation, so completely turned that around, secured the base, secured the flank, and now I'm moving on. So we're going to be able to engage now this M103. Now this is sort of my peer in tier 9. Similar kind of armor profile to me, strong turret, not such strong hull armor. Maybe I'll put another round into him here. What I'm going to do is block him off. I'm going to show him my turret, show him the side. You see I get the bounce there off the side. So as I said, when you're not up against a huge gun, something similar to your own, you can get some bounces. Also by continually pushing onto him, putting pressure on him, you force him to rush his shots, and you're more likely to get a bounce. And there we go, mastery badge delivered. But this is the only time I was able to master the Conqueror, by the way. And it is a difficult tank to play, and as I said, even when you know the tank well, when you're experienced, you can struggle when you're up tiered. So just to recap on the tactics, you know, when you're top tier, you can bully a bit, push on. Your rate of fire, turret armor, and your mobility give you a lot of strengths. You're a fantastic brawler, even in the 2v1 situation, as you saw there. If you're up tiered, though, you need to be far more cautious, because the tank doesn't really have anything that's particularly brilliant at. So try to support either your mediums using that fantastic power to weight ratio. You can keep up with them, or go with your heavies. but try to use the heavier armor in front of you. If you've got an E100 or a Yagaru or an IS-4, try to use their armor and support them with that really good rate of fire you have. And of course, don't forget your Hesh. The Hesh is something special. Ironically, in that game, I didn't switch to Hesh, but I was after my first engagement, when I was involved in the brawl, I didn't want to risk any low rolls, so that's why I kept with the AP rounds. And then when I was engaging the M103 front on, obviously I needed the AP rounds to pen them. But when you're on the sides or on the back of tanks, 120mm of pen on a Hesh is going to get you results time and time again. So don't forget it. You can do a lot more damage per minute if you're rolling Hesh rounds into the enemy. So let's have a recap on this Schrodinger's tank, simultaneously good and bad. It's a hit or miss tank, right, as we said, because there's nothing that really stands out as fantastic about it, so there's no clear strategy. But it does have decent DPM. As we said, there's that 8.84 second reload if you use a gun rammer, which means you can fire a lot. It has its pen is good too, especially if you're top tier. The armor is okay, but there are a lot of vulnerable points in it, too many for it to be really effective as a frontline heavy tank. But the spaced armor on the sides is good, and take note of what we said about coming up against HE and Hesh. Go against your instincts and turn to the side, try to absorb the big round on the sides, because the spaced armor will take a lot of that damage, maybe all of it. You're presented a big target on the side of the turret. If you can turn your turret to face but the side of the tank on, that's your optimal position if you have a big gun going to fire Hesh or HE at you. Use supercharge to maximize the muzzle velocity. Use refined gun to reduce your dispersion. It has 7 degrees of gun depression, 15 of elevation, so it has decent gun alignment, but it's not great, right? It's not what you expect really from this line. But it does have this excellent power to weight ratio, excellent traverse, and therefore it's a really good brawler, especially if you are top tier. You can brawl with confidence. The traverse and the power to weight ratio are unexpected too. Mediums and lights are not expecting you to be so agile, to swivel your gun around so quickly and to be able to put your armor into them, as you saw with the Panther 2 and the RU there. I think they were expecting a nice easy kill on a slow lumbering heavy, and it didn't work out that way for them. Use engine accelerator 2, that also helps with the brawling because it both helps with the engine and the traverse. Hesh, of course, don't forget the Hesh. 120mm of pen, giving you 515 plus damage points, can make you into a real DPM monster. So if you have a medium or a light tank, particularly if you're on the sides or behind them, even some heavies, that Hesh round will go through. For example, American heavies, that Hesh is going to pen them back on every time. So just be aware of that. Keep your shell selector open and rotate through your shells as the targets present themselves. So the music was Holt's Planet Sweet, Mars, The Bringer of War, and The Horde from Warcraft original soundtrack on the tech spec. So cheers, Mush. Hope you found it useful. Hope you found it helpful. Hope you enjoyed it too. And remember to keep your masks on when you're out. And I guess all remains for me to say is pants off.